Well, now it's actually time to write some code to make this UserDao object work. So, how do we do it? Well, the UserDao is going to be a tool that we're going to use, or a class that we're going to use to return user objects. Now, if we're a user of the UserDao objects, in other words, we're like the login controller using the UserDao object, or we're some part of an email controller, like view inbox controller for email, looking at emails, when you're going to use an email DAO object, the key thing to realize is that the DAO hides from other programs. It hides how the data is actually stored in the data store. So what you do is you interact with the DAO doing insert, update, delete, and selects, issuing those method calls basically. And how those method calls work, DAO users, they don't care. Maybe it's writing to a file, maybe it's going out and using Firebase, maybe it's using a database. None of that matters. All right, so let's get this working. So import sys, we're going to need that to do some file I/O. From user, import user. Well, that's important because we need the import sys to do file I/O as the DAO, and we need the actual user object to read stuff into users. And now we'll create our class UserDao. And now what we're going to do is create the constructor. Now the constructor is pretty simple, but it's really important, and I want you to pay really close attention to it. So it doesn't take any arguments, and you saw that when we were creating UserDAOs a little while ago. All right, so we're going to say self.filename equals users.txt. All right, that is it for the constructor. Wow, not a lot of code there. So we created a member, and the member's name is self.filename. So every DAO that you create, whether you're going to create your own user DAO, or you're going to create your own email DAOs, or maybe you have an inbox DAO and an outbox DAO, whatever you do, there's going to be a very important member that's in the constructor for the DAO, and that is the name of the file that you're going to be working with. Now, if we were to use a database instead, what we would have in the constructor is maybe the name of the database, the credentials that are used to log into the database, or something like that. Okay, so two super important methods for this particular DAO, and these are what I would call private methods. I don't know if you can do private methods in Python, but we're not going to do anything fancy with this. But what I'm going to tell you is that these two methods, the read users method and the write users method, no one outside of the DAO ever sees this or uses this. Users of the DAO are going to use that select, insert, update, and delete to manipulate the DAO. All right, so def read users self. So all this does is it opens the file, and we're going to store all the users that we're reading in this empty list. And we're going to open the file, so with open self.filename read as file, and then lines equals file.readLines. Now all of the lines in the file are stored in the list lines, and now we're going to iterate for line in lines, and we're going to get a raw line. Raw equals line.split. And what this is going to do is it's going to split the line on commas. So if we take a look at the user file, oh, sorry, not on commas, on space. So Bob space CSRox55, Ralph space CSRox55, Shai space CSRox55, and let's not forget Tim. Okay. This is a little cool Emacs mojo for you. All right. So now what I want to do, I'm splitting in space. So now raw is basically a list with two elements. So the first element is the username and the second element is the password. And so I am going to call a method called row2user that takes in raw. So what row2user is going to do is it's going to take, I guess we don't have to call this raw, let's call this row. That's better. All right. And row. Okay. So it takes in a row and it converts the row to a user. All right. And now we're going to append that row to the result that we're going to return back. So if there's no users, we'll return an empty list. Hopefully we'll never have that. All right. And we're going to return result. All right, cool. So that's read users. This is very similar to the code that you already have that reads a user file. The only thing I did is I encapsulated it all in a method, and I called the method read users. And the other thing that I did is instead of read users returning a set of strings that you have to parse and manipulate, read users actually returns real users. That's what self.row2user does. Okay. All right, let's write the code for, well, what the heck? Why don't we write the code for row2user? All right. So I'm doing a lot of talking, but why don't you try this as an exercise? So I'm going to write the code for row2user, but why don't you do the same thing? Write the code for row2user. So just hit pause and then take a shot at it with a pencil and a piece of paper. All right, so hit pause now. Welcome back. I assume you've hit pause and now you've unpaused and you're ready to check your answer against mine. So here we go. Def row2user. And we are going to take in a user and self and a row. All right, now we're going to create a user by calling the user constructor. And we already wrote the code for the user constructor, and it takes two arguments. It takes the user ID, and that's row sub 0, and it takes a password, and that's row sub 1. And now we're going to return user. Okay. I guess we can tighten that up a little bit. Okay. So we've taken care of read users, which is using row2user. As it turns out, later there are some other things that are going to use row2user, perhaps. So it's awesome to have that method in place. Now let's take a look at write users. So def write users. So what write users is going to do is it's going to take an argument which is a list of users. So we have users plural, and it's going to take those users, that collection of users, and it's going to write it out to the file users.txt. So here we go with open self.filename, comma. So we're opening the file for writing as file. And now we're going to iterate through the users. So for user in users, line equals self.user to row. So you notice we had a row to user, now we have a user to row. We're going to pass in user, and then we're going to write out the line plus a \n. Oops, that'll get us to a new line. So that'll give us a user ID and a password separated by a space, and then we're going to write that row. I guess we can call that row. I don't like the name line there because it's not as clear as row. What I like about this is there's a symmetry. So we've got row equals self to user, self user to row user. We've got user equals self row to user row. So we've got a really nice symmetry there. Okay, cool. So that writes out the file, and let's see. When we're done with that for loop, we're going to do a file.close. It's probably clear to have that line there. And we are done. Okay, so that code writes out a user. Now we have to write the code for user to row, self user. So the input is a user, the output is a row. So row is equal to, well, why don't you think about it for a second and see if you can figure it out. Hit pause, hit pause, hit pause, hit pause. And we're back. Okay, so we're going to create a row by saying user.userID plus a space plus user.password. And and then we're going to return row. All right, so what we've written so far, and there's quite a bit of code here, but what we've written so far is the code that is the sort of internal guts that allows UserDao to work. None of this code is going to be used by anything other than UserDao. If we bump up a level and we think about the login controller, which needs to get a bunch of users and check them out, and perhaps if the login controller is super sophisticated, you could even create a user using the login controller. None of that code knows about any of these methods. It doesn't know that there is a users.txt file. It doesn't know how to open a file for read or open file for write or do any of that stuff. The only thing that the login controller knows how to do is use the UserDao to do CRUD, create, read, update, delete, on user objects. All right, so we're hiding the details of that in UserDao. Okay, cool. So what do we need to do next? Well, why don't we write some code to do some useful methods? So how about a method called select? So what select is going to do is it's going to read users from the data store, and it's going to be used by things like the login controller. So we're going to hide the details of the file, but we're still going to allow the login controller to specify some stuff. So this select, I'm going to say select all. So if you call select all, the idea is you're interested in reading all of the users from the database. All right? Well, let's take a look at the code we have so far. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can just see what we have here. Can you think of how we might possibly write the code to make select all work? So remember, the job of select all is to return all of the users that are in the data store. All right, hit pause for a second to think about this. Okay. If you thought about it, it actually isn't so hard. It's actually pretty easy. Select all is basically the same thing as read users. So if we say result is equal to self.readUsers, and then we return result, we have taken care of all the code for select all. How about that? All right. Now we do have another method that we have to write, another select that we have to write. That's a little trickier, and that is we have to write a method for selecting a user by user ID. If you think about the way the login controller works, most of the time a user ID is going to be passed in the form. You're going to grab that user ID, and then you're going to use isValid to check to see if that user ID is in the database and then in the data store, and then if the password matches. So we need a method that selects by user ID. Now, if you're writing this for your email program, you might decide that you need other types of select. Maybe you have a select by sender name, or select by receiver name, or select by subject, or select by whatever. You might have all those methods, and they'll be super useful, and you want to just hide the complexity of what makes those methods work. Hide that complexity in the DAO. Don't let it bubble up to the controller. The controller should just ask the DAO, hey, give me these emails, and here's the criteria for getting, here's the criteria I want to get to select or filter out a set of emails. All right, so select by user ID. So we're going to take in a user ID. Actually, yeah, we're going to actually take in a user ID. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say user equals none, just in case we don't read in that user. And then I'm going to say users. Oh, actually, I like setting it up better this way. We'll call it result. It's good to use result. Okay. Oh, no, I'm changing my mind again. I'm just looking at the way this is written and some of the patterns. I like to use result a lot when I have a method that's supposed to do something, but I didn't use it consistently here, so I think I will use user. Okay, so user equals none, and then users, the list of users, equals self.select all. So I'm trying to eat my own dog food. All right, I could just say read users there as well, but I think it's a little clearer. So I'm selecting all the users and stuffing them into users. And I have a user, the user I'm going to return is none. And now I'm going to run a little for loop here. So for user in users, if user.userID is equal to user ID, then return user. Oh, I can see I'm going to have a problem here. I don't think I can do that. And otherwise, one second. I wonder if I have a little spacing issue here. No. Okay. All right. We escape that for loop. If we do not hit that return user, it means we went through all of the users in the user list, which is all of the users, and we didn't get a user ID match. If that happens, that means we had a bogus user ID. So we're going to return none. So we're either going to return user or return none. All right? Spacing here is a little funky. Let's see here. Getting a little twitchy. Oh, I did have a little error there. Okay. All right, now everything lines up right. So I think we're good. Okay, cool. So that's select by user ID. So now we have the the R in CRUD, the read part in CRUD working. And like I said, I've got select by user ID here. You could have a select by password. That would be a little weird, but you could. And if you're dealing with a different kind of model, like an email or a book, you could have other criteria that you do select by. You're definitely going to have a select all, and then often you'll have a few special selects with certain special filter criteria. Okay, so hey, it's time to insert. Let's do an insert. So insert means we're going to be adding a new user to the data store. So in this case, it means we're adding a new line to users.txt. Now the cool thing is we've done all of the hard work to set it up so we don't have to write tons of code to make that work anymore, thanks to already having written the code for write users. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do an insert self, comma, user. And so the idea is we're going to insert that user. Now, the way we're going to make this work is first I'm going to say users equals self dot select all. Now I have all the users in this collection. All right, in this collection users, except for the one user that I want to add. So by doing select all, I go to users.txt, I read in all the users, I now have a collection of them all in this users list. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say users.append user. That makes sense, right? I'm going to add the user to that collection. And then I'm going to write the users back out. Self.write users, users. All right, and that, my friends, is it. That takes care of the insert. So now I'm able to add a user. Now remember, I'm showing you this example for one data access object design pattern for the user. But you can use the same pattern for almost any data type that you're working with, any data model you're working with, whether it be books or emails or just about anything. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's do an update. So we're going to update user. Now, when we do an update, what it means is that we are we're going to take the user that's in the data store and replace it with this user. Okay, so what would that mean? Well, if I were to update the password for a user, then I'd want to change Bob from CSRocks55 to Sailing Rocks 55, right? If I wanted to do that, I would pass in a new Bob, a new user, with Bob and the password Sailing Rocks 55, and this update method would then go into users.txt, change it around so that Bob is updated. This isn't really a trivial undertaking, but it can be if you eat your own dog food, which means if you use methods that you have written or you're going to write, you can make your life a lot easier. So let's do that. So here's my idea. Well, first of all, before I spill the beans, it's actually really easy to do this if you eat your own dog food. And I'll give you a hint, you can use the methods of the DAO, the methods that we're writing in the DAO to make this a lot easier. So hit the pause button for a second. Think about how you might do this. How might you update this without doing all kinds of crazy file I/O? Right? How might you update Bob with a new password? And I will hit pause. And we're back. Okay, so if you thought about it a little bit, you realize that what we're trying to do with the DAO is create, read, update, delete, right? So we've got create, that's our insert. We've got read, that's our select all. We've got update, which we're working on. And we're going to have to write a delete method in a moment. All right, so if we assume that that delete method existed, all right, so let's just assume it exists. All right, if you're starting to get an idea of what to do here, hit pause again and work it out. And we're back again. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to actually delete the user first. Self.delete user. All right, now we've removed the user from users.txt. So what that means is that if we say self.insert user, then voila, by eating our own dog food, we're able to do an update. We delete the user, then we reinsert the user, and life is good. Now, there's one little caveat here. Some restrictions apply, and here's the problem. When we do delete user and we pass in user, we're passing in a user with a different password, right? So we're passing in Bob with Sailing55 instead of Bob with CSRocks55. Bob with CSRocks55, that's what's in the data store at the moment. Bob with Sailing55, that's what we'd liked the password to be. So this user that we're deleting isn't a real user. But if we're smart about how we write, oops, I wrote delete user here and I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done insert user either. This delete, actually, if we're smart about how we write it, it'll have the effect of searching for Bob. So we just have to be smart about how we write it. So users equals self.select all. So now we're going to read all the users. And how are we doing for time here? Oh yeah, we're good. Okay, and I'm going to write a for loop. So for okay, so for user, how do I do this? Data store user in users if data store user dot user ID equals user dot user ID, then users, then found is equal to true. Found equals true. Oh, I don't know. I gotta think about this. Yeah, okay, I like that. Then let's say users dot remove users data store user, and we're going to return. All right. Now, if we get all the way through, this, and the data store user that's in user, we don't get a match. So we get to this line right here, we've got a problem. Oh, I see a mistake here. So users.remove, and then we're going to say self.write users. Okay, cool. So a little bit more code complexity here, and I'm going to just space that out so we have the return there. So what this code does is it goes through all of the users that are in the data store, and it looks for the match between the data store user, the user that's stored in the data store, and the user ID of the user that was passed in to delete. And if it finds a match, we're going to remove the data store user from the list of users, and we are going to write out the data file back to the disk. And then we're going to return. Now, if we get here, we have Houston, we have a problem. And so I would say logger dot error unable to find user to delete. Okay, cool. All right, so that takes care of delete. So now we just have one more method to write, and that is the populate method. And the goal of the populate method is to just write out a list of users to the data store. So I'm going to create a users empty list, and I'm going to do users.append self.user to row. Oh, I see what I did. No, let's just keep it simple, and we'll try to eat our own dog food. So we're going to say users.append user Bob CS rocks 55, and then we'll just repeat this. We're going to have Ralph, and then Shy, and then Tim. And then we're going to say self dot write users. Guess we could just insert them, right? Yeah, why don't we just do that? Oh, no. No, that won't work. We have to write them all out at once. Okay, cool. So all I have to do is just add users equals brackets. And then I'm just going to change the names here to Ralph, Shy, and Tim. Okay. Ooh, and let's spell populate correctly. Populate. All right. So if the populate method gets run, if you say UserDao, if you say DAO, so you would say something like this, like in a program somewhere, you would say DAO equals UserDao. And then you could say DAO.populate. And if you do that, what's going to happen is that the users.txt file will get wiped out, the data store gets wiped out, and in its place, a data store containing the user IDs Bob, Ralph, Shy, and Tim with those passwords will get put in. So this is a really nice way to kind of, if you want to make sure you don't go crazy when you're working on programs and you need to seed your data stores with some useful data, this is a way to do it. You use populate to seed your data store with useful data. You will find this very useful with your email program because you're going to be messing up the data stores for your email programs, your email program over and over again as you do inserts and deletes and stuff like that. They'll get corrupted. And if you have populate methods, you can always reset your data store to some known state and start all over again. Okay, that takes care of the bulk of our discussion about design patterns for version 2 of the email system. What I need to still do is I need to go through with you and discuss the code for the survey page and the results page. And that's going to involve more reinforcing of the model view controller design pattern and also discussion of a DAO that's associated with a book instead of a user. So that should be interesting, and stay tuned for that.